Okay, I know this screen is blurry. I can't get it any clearer than that, so this will have to do. This lesson is on trig ratios, and you need to have your graphing calculator nearby when you're doing this, okay? Trigonometry is the study of right triangles and ratios of the sides of right triangles. So you can only use trig ratios in right triangles, okay? Now, one thing I want you always to pay attention to is pay attention to the angle identified. And I'll show you what I mean by that in this picture. I don't know how to get that stuff off the screen either, so let me move this over. Okay? Ratios are fractions, so there are three that you need to know. You need to know the sine, the cosine, and the tangent. All right? We're talking about this triangle down here. And the angle identified is this angle right here. So in this picture right here, this is the angle identified. All right? In this triangle, that is the angle identified. When you have a right triangle, you all should always know where the hypotenuse is. So in this triangle, this is the hypotenuse. Before we talk about this triangle, I want to give you what a sine is. Sine is the ratio of the opposite side over the hypotenuse side. Okay? Cosine is the adjacent side over the hypotenuse. And tangent is the opposite side over the adjacent side. So one thing I want you to note, I wish this could get clearer. One thing I want you to note is in a tangent, there is no hypotenuse. No hypotenuse when you're doing tangent. Okay? So, these are the three ratios. You will have to learn them. So the first thing I want to do is talk about finding a side. Okay? So the angle identified is x. And I'm going to say, let's make x 16 degrees. And I'm also going to give you the hypotenuse is 55. And I want to make this side over here x. So when you do trig ratios, you will have two of the three things. You'll either have the sine, the cosine, or the tangent. You'll have the opposite side or the hypotenuse, or the adjacent and the hypotenuse, and the opposite and adjacent. When you talk about sine, you'll be given an angle. When you talk about cosine, an angle, and tangent, an angle. So in this picture, if I give you the angle is 16 degrees, so we know an angle, and we know a hypotenuse is 55. It has to be either sine or cosine. The reason it has to be one of those is I see hypotenuse and hypotenuse, and we know the hypotenuse. In tangent, there's no hypotenuse. If this is the angle identified, I have to decide if x, is it the opposite of the angle or is it adjacent to the angle? Opposite or adjacent? This would be opposite 16 degrees. This side over here would be adjacent because adjacent means touching. So if I'm talking about finding x, and I want to find a side, I would write the sine of the angle, which is 16 degrees, equals, it's a fraction, opposite would be x, hypotenuse would be 55. And that is how I would set up my math problem to find a side. There's various ones, but I just want to show you this for now. However, let's say I want to find an angle. So I'm going to make this z degrees. And I want to talk about finding an angle. And we're going to talk about finding angle z. And we know this hypotenuse is 55, and I want to make this 23 degrees. Okay? Now, if I'm changing my angle identified, we used to be talking about this angle. Now I'm going to talk about this angle, z. And if I'm talking about angle z, opposite angle z is 23. Not degrees, I'm sorry, just 23. This is now opposite. And this is the hypotenuse. So if I want to find an angle, you have to use something called the inverse. Okay? Angles have to use an inverse. So I go back and I figure out, is this sine or cosine? Because I have a hypotenuse. If I'm talking about z, this is opposite and this is a hypotenuse. So we set this up differently. This is still sine, but we're going to write this as sine, and an inverse is a -1. Then you put your ratio, and that's 23 over 55, and that would equal z. So the first thing I want you to realize, when you find sides, you set this up differently than when you find angles. Angles have to use this little -1 inverse. Okay? So now let's talk about how to actually do this problem. Set up an equation to find x. Round to the nearest tenth. When you do these problems, step 1, identify your angle. This is talking about 62 degrees. This is my angle identified. I look at my right triangle. 10 is my hypotenuse. I have to ask myself, is x the opposite of 62 or is it the adjacent of 62? This is adjacent because it is touching the angle. The side is touching the angle. So I'm going to use adjacent and hypotenuse, which is now the cosine. I'm also finding a side. So the way that you're going to set this up is cosine of 62 equals adjacent is x, hypotenuse is 10. That's how we're going to set it up. Before we solve, you must go in your calculator and you must hit mode. Mode, right here. Change the mode. You must change the mode to degrees because our angles are in degrees. So you arrow down to radian. You arrow to the right and make it flashing on degree. Then you must hit enter. And do you see how it's just flashing on degree? To get out of this mode now, we're going to hit second quit. So our calculator is ready. Next, to solve this math problem, we have to solve for x. We're going to multiply both sides by 10. By 10. When I multiply by 10, this is 10 over 1. So these divide out. And I'm left with x. So I grab my calculator. I'm going to type 10. And then I need cosine. Cosine is right here. I'm going to hit cosine. I'm going to put my angle in, 62, close it, and hit enter. The directions say round to the nearest tenth. So the nearest tenth would be 4.7. So I'm going to put 4.7. I'm going to change these equal signs to approximately. And our first problem is done. Problem number 2. This is the angle identified. The hypotenuse is here, but I don't know the hypotenuse. X, across from it, opposite, is 13. 15 is adjacent. So this would not be sine or cosine because they have hypotenuse. This would be the tangent. So you're going to set this up, but this is an angle. So when it's an angle, you have to do the inverse. I'm going to put 13 opposite over adjacent. 15 is approximately x. So when you do an inverse, the inverse is up above tangent. Do you see it up above? Cosine inverse. And so to get those, you have to push second tangent. And that's how you get this on here. We're going to put in a fraction. I'm going to put 13 over 15. Close it. Hit enter. And I'm going to round to the nearest tenth. So that is 40.9. Last problem. The angle identified is 46. X is my hypotenuse. Across from 46, the opposite is 27. This would be sine. I'm finding a side, so I'm going to put sine of 46 is 27 over x. Opposite, hypotenuse. Now this one is solved differently because the variable's in the denominator. So to solve this, you have to multiply by x. That divides this. So you have x sine of 46 is 27. To get x by itself, you have to divide by the sine of 46. These divide. I have x. I grab my calculator, and we're going to do 27 divided by sine, what was it, 46. We're going to round it to the nearest tenth, so that rounds to 37.5. Now, all three of those are solved differently. So make sure you see how they're set up and how they're solved. So make sure you know why they're differently solved. All three of them are solved differently. And the last thing on this video is this is a way to memorize your trig ratios. So, ka, toa. This is your sine, is your opposite over hypotenuse. This is cosine, is adjacent over hypotenuse. And this is tangent, is opposite over adjacent. Remember that to help you. Now 4, 5, and 6 are on the bottom for you to try, and all the answers are at the bottom for you to check. So if you need some additional help, make sure you see me and I'll help you.